Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and I'm excited to be with you for the next hour or so. This webinar is called InfoPain to Launch Your Studies. And I know that's not a complete sentence, but it is what the webinar is about today. We're going to spend the whole time looking at the InfoPain in Accordance. I'll be using Accordance 13. We're of course up to Accordance 14 now, and the InfoPain was introduced, I want to say, in Accordance 11. So even if you're on a different version, whether you're on Mac or Windows, what we are looking at today will apply. The InfoPain is not in any of the mobile apps, so we're talking about the desktop app. But here is the handout, and I want to make sure that you can access that before we begin. This has the outline of what we'll cover today. It's just one page. Hopefully you're hearing me by now and seeing my screen and seeing this handout, which you can download for yourself in the handouts section of your GoToWebinar control panel. GoToWebinar is just the platform that we use for these webinars, and the control panel is the vertically oriented rectangle you ought to be seeing. Once you log in, you should see that. If you are here watching this on a recording and want to access the handout after the fact, you can email me at abramkj@accordancebible.com, and if you request the handout, I'd be happy to send it to you. So today we're going to spend the hour, as I mentioned, talking about how to most efficiently use Accordance's InfoPain. So we're first going to talk about what it is, and we're going to define it very specifically, which will help us understand how to use it. And then we'll talk about how to set it up and how to customize it, and then how to use it to launch your studies. I think I mentioned today is being recorded, so if you are here live, you will get a link to the recording later, as well as a link to the handout. We try to be redundant with offering access to these webinars to folks, so I mentioned that as well. If you've got questions, type them into the questions box, and I'd be happy to read them out loud anonymously and respond to them, maybe privately, but more often than not, it's a question that is for everyone, and so I'll just read it and share. All right, let's talk about the InfoPain. So I'm going to launch Accordance, and I'm going to, as I do, just share that the InfoPain is context-specific access to whatever you have in your library on a given verse. So let's go to Ephesians 2. And here I'm in a workspace. If I go to, just to start over, if I go to File and New Workspace, what Accordance will do is open up my workspace to my default search text, my default Bible text. These are just some highlight files that I have here. In fact, I'm going to hide those because we don't need those for today. All right, so I can go to, we'll say Ephesians 2, and let's say I'm studying this just wonderfully rich passage, and I've got my Bible text open. That was the first thing that happened when I went to a new workspace, and this is my default search text. You can change this, by the way. This is a sidebar, although I think it's important enough to share it. Under Settings or Preferences in Windows, wherever you get your settings or preferences, if you go to search tabs, it's a little more than halfway down. That's going to change your setting for a new search tab. So in other words, whenever you open up a new workspace or a new search tab specifically, and it just calls a new tab a search tab because of the searching feature being front and center, you can tell it which one to do. So I'm actually going to I'm going to keep it here. You know what? I'm actually not going to. I'm going to change it to the NET Bible 2nd edition with Strong's. So click on OK. Now, of course, this stayed the same, but if I go to File, New Workspace, now I've got this different default text. All right, so then I'm in Ephesians 2 with my default text, and what I'm going to do is open up the InfoPain, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. There are a couple ways to get the InfoPain, and you don't need to know all of them. You'll see here I've got the toolbar showing up at the top. And if you right-click on that, here's another aside or sidebar, so to speak. You can change what's showing here. And I won't get into that now, but the info pane is part of the default set. So that eye there gives you the info pane. So if I click on that eye, it's going to open the info pane, and it's going to give me info for Ephesians 2:1. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But that's one way to open the info pane. Just tap or click on the info pane icon. Now you can hide this toolbar. So let's say you're operating in a workflow where the toolbar is hidden. And one reason you might do that is because it does take up screen space. I don't have a very large screen. And so I often will minimize that. In that case, you can go to add parallel and get the info pane there. It's the same thing. In fact, here I'm opening up multiple info panes. You may not need to do that. So you can just close it here. But add parallel info pane is where I get that. There is also, nope, there's not. I thought there might be a menu for that, but there's not. So those are the two ways. Again, with the toolbar showing and add parallel info pane. A little pro tip, I guess, and I call it a pro tip. Maybe it's basic, but it took me a while to figure this out. You can have every time you open a Bible text, not only have it open your default text, but have it open an info pane with it. And that's in the same place where I changed my new search tab. And there's an option in that same section of the preferences or settings to go to add info pane. Click on OK. So now if I go to File, New Workspace, you know that it's going to open up the NET with Strong's second edition because that's my default text. But now it took my setting of add info pane. So what we should see is the NET on one side and the info pane on the other. And there it is. And so now when I type my passage or whatever I'm searching, it will go right there. So that's all a matter of personal preference. If you are doing a lot of verse-based research, grammar, study Bibles, commentaries, you may wish to have that open. Although I remember reaching a point where I think it was probably a month or two of consistently closing the info pane because I had developed a different workflow that had more to do with the texts than these secondary sources, and it took me a while, I'm embarrassed to admit, to find that. So hopefully I can save you some time with that. You can turn that off so that now your default is just a Bible text. But however you do it, you can add the parallel or close it, and then you can also get it from the toolbar if you've got that showing. So let's get the info pane back, and I've kind of gone a little bit beyond the outline already, but let's talk about what it actually is. So I've defined it here as concisely as I could think: context-specific access to library for a single verse of text. So there's a few things in that definition. It's context-specific, and so the idea here is that you don't have to wonder what commentaries do you have on Ephesians. It's going to pull them up for you. And so you don't have to, open them up individually. It is access to your library. So what it's going to be drawing on is stuff you already have. So if you don't have a commentary, obviously it's not going to show up there. One of the things, just speaking personally, that I appreciate about Accordance is that you are not going to get a image showing some commentary, and then you click on it and it says you don't own this, but to purchase it, go here. It's only showing stuff you already own in the library, in your library. That also is important though, because if you know you own a commentary and you know you're in the right verse and you know that commentary covers it and it's not showing, that may simply mean that you haven't installed it in your library. And this becomes an issue if you're using Accordance on a couple of different machines. I just use it on one now, but I had a long period of time where I had it on a home computer and a church office computer, and you have to install separately on different devices. So just make sure, if you're not seeing something you think you should, you just want to make sure it's installed. And then the last part of this definition, so it's context specific, it's access to your library, and it's for a single verse of text. And I only belabor this because the info pane, it tells you right up at the top, info for Ephesians 2:1. And I belabor this just to say it's not giving you passage specific comments, although it might, depending on how your commentary is structured. But what it's essentially doing underneath the hood, so to speak, is it's running a research search of all of your resources for a particular verse. And so I'll show you that this is another feature. In fact, I'll probably offer this webinar soon. Again, I try to do this quarterly or so. There is a research search in Accordance where you could search by verse, and then you could tell it to search all of your, I don't know, commentaries, all of your everything. And then it's going to pull up whatever has Ephesians 2:1 in it. Well, that's what your info pane is doing, only it's doing it multiple categories at a time: grammar, study Bibles, commentaries, and all the different categories we'll go through. But I mentioned that it is verse specific because what you're going to see as you scroll through, and I'm just using my trackpad now, I'm seeing a lot of book cover images change. And all that means is that I'm advancing by verse, and that Ephesians 2:6 returns hits when searched in these two grammars, but Ephesians 2:7 returns hits in additional grammars. And all that means is that some grammars cover Ephesians 2:7, some cover Ephesians 2:6, some cover both. So don't be alarmed when you see, as I just kind of scroll a little bit more quickly through the passage here, my info pane is going all over the place, it looks like. But actually what it's doing is it's running these searches really quickly and giving me the context specific access to my library for that particular verse. And we'll see this in practice in just a moment. But that's what the info pane is. That's how you get it set up. That's the very basic kind of 101 info pane that you can open it via add parallel, close it with the X. You can also get it from the toolbar if you've got that showing. You can toggle that on and off. We talked about how to make that a more permanent setting, that it would open with you every time you open a Bible text, which of course you can turn off. And you saw me do this. You can open up multiple info panes at once. That's there are probably some more advanced use cases for that we won't get into, but there's a pretty good amount of flexibility here. And then finally, I'll just say one more thing before I want to pause to see what questions folks have, if any. This dividing line here, when you move your cursor to it, notice that it turns from a pointer to a vertical line bifurcated or split in half by an arrow going in both directions. And that means, that's my computer's way of telling me you can click and drag this and it will do something. And specifically what it will do here is change the size of my info pane. Again, that's super basic, but in a day-to-day setting that may be really useful. You may not want this much info pane and this little text. You may want, you know, it kind of off to the side here. We'll talk more about how you can actually customize this info pane, but let me stop there and see what questions folks have, as I just mentioned that last part about resizing, or you can even move it down to the bottom if you like that. I personally find that I have to scroll more and I see less there, so I like it vertical, but you can change that as well if you like. All right, let's pause for questions. Oh yeah, here's a great question. Does Accordance info pane allow you to change the background color? Let me put that in the chat so that folks can see that question. And we will be talking about the different, actually next up is gear icon to set info pane options. So we'll get into this more, but there is not, that I know of, a way to do this. I think what this is following, so I think the short answer is no. If I'm missing something glaring and somebody knows otherwise, please let me know, but I don't think you can. This is following the setting here in my general, somewhere is the display. the general theme. So if I change my general theme to something else, you can see how the info pane changes there. Can you see that in the background? But that's the overall theme. So if I do grayscale, I'm just previewing it here. This is the theme in Accordance 13, which you have in 14 as well. So that is doing it. You can do something with dark mode, but I am almost positive that you cannot change that. But if someone knows otherwise, and if you would let me know in the typed chat, that would be great. But I don't think you can. Any other comments or questions? I see a hand raised, so let me see. We'll go ahead and do that. Henry, I'm going to unmute you, and if that's not on purpose, you can lower your hand. Sometimes folks do that on accident, but I'll assume it was on purpose. So let me unmute you, and you're free to speak. And we're not hearing you. I think you have to unmute from your end as well, Henry. Okay, I'm not getting anything. Henry, if you've got a question, feel free to type it into the chat, and I'd be happy to respond there, or you can try again later. All right, let's move more into using the info pane and see what we can do with the settings. So yeah, there's not a way to change the color unless you change the whole theme of Accordance. And you know, I'm not looking at dark mode, but obviously dark mode changes the whole thing. But you can now, there are some info pane options that we want to look at, and that's next on the outline. And I'll go kind of quickly through this because what I really think is probably most useful is actually using the stuff that's showing in the info pane, but just a bit more on the settings. And then I'll go kind of briefly through that, and if there are questions, you can stop and ask. You can either right-click to get set info pane options, or you can go to this gear icon to get set info pane options. There's also a keyboard shortcut, often multiple ways to do the same thing in Accordance. And there aren't a whole lot of options here to change, but there are a few that you would maybe want to consider. The first kind of set of options is what are you seeing visually here? And so if you don't want the book covers to show, you can just look at titles instead. Now I miss how well I still use print books plenty, and I miss, you know, that I used to do it more. So I personally like the reminder of the book covers, the visual that adds for me. And in fact, I can what's the technical word? I can grok. I can see and recognize a text much more quickly visually. So I leave that on. But some folks who are really kind of trying to minimize or I should say maximize screen real estate may change that. So I mean, you could even do something like medium small, and then you can change how many commentaries show. And so now I've got 10 commentaries that will show by default if I open up my info pane. So there's 10 showing now. You can also change your cross-reference tool. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the other kind of major setting that you can change is the hypertext, which is basically just going to be when there's a hyperlinked verse, what is it showing in your instant details. So anytime you've got, in fact, here, I'll give you a good example here. If I go to Mark 1, actually, let me go to Mark 16 because this might be easier to find there. So I've got parallel passages, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but it's Matthew 28:1 is a parallel passage, and from the info pane, anytime I have a verse reference in the info pane, I can hover over it or click it open. But what translation or what text? It doesn't even have to be a translation. It could be the original Greek. What do you want it to be? Now, I've got the NET here. But in my info pane options, I've got the hypertext, so hyperlinked text to NRSV. And you could change that to match your default search text. You could say, you know, I'm trying really hard these days to learn Greek, so let's have it be Greek. And then when I see hypertext here, there it is in Greek. So those are a few settings. There are not a whole lot of settings. There are more customizations you can make to the info pane, and we'll do that in just a moment. That's going to happen by way of drag and drop, and we'll talk about that and kind of spend a lot more time on that. But I did want to just surface this initial set of info pane options that you can do. The order of the categories will change. We'll talk about that next. But here in this little box, just a few options, but they're ones that if you're going to be on a screen for a long time, you might want to consider. How large do you want the book images to be? You can make them small. That's too hard for me to see, but that's just something to take some time playing with and until you find a happy medium. However many initial commentaries you have showing in the commentary category, and that will apply to your study Bibles as well, you can always click on show more or show less. And that's just a matter of personal preference. So I would commend to you this gear icon, also Command T, maybe a different keyboard shortcut. I suspect it's Control T on Windows, but it will tell you there. And then right click, you can get at it that way. Those are some of the info pane options. But we'll talk next now about rearranging the categories because that's not in the settings, but that is something you might want to do. You might notice, for example, I've got grammar showing first. That's not the default setting for info pane. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but I just want to pause again and check in again on our questions. Okay, so here's a question somebody asks, is it possible to add a certain Bible translation such as NABRE? Is the request that that's something that is not in accordance and you'd like to see it in accordance? If that's the case, the place to do that would be at the Accordance forums, which you can get to through the help menu here. I'm sorry, here, this help menu. And if you go to the discussion forums there, if you click that open, it'll take you to the forums. And you can, I would even just search NABRE in the forums to see if someone's requested it already. I'm not sure if we have that or not, but if we don't, which I think is what's behind your question, you can request it there at the forums. So feel free to ask a follow-up if I've misunderstood or if there's any issue with that. Oh, okay, somebody says NABRE is available. All right, excellent. Well then actually, so maybe the first step would be open up a web browser and just type in, yeah, there it is. So that is, provided that's the same NABRE, that is in accordance. Thank you for that, Bert. Let me put that in the chat. Okay, yeah, so I would search the store first, just with any translation, and then if it's not there, then you can go to the forums and make a request. All right, well, let's talk about these categories. And again, it's so much of what I'm showing today is just a matter of your personal preference. In accordance, you know, admittedly, it can be a little overwhelming how customizable it is, but it's also kind of awesome. So this setting here is actually pretty consistent with what I use on a regular basis. And so if I am, you know, let's open up a new tab. If I'm working on a Greek text, and I'll just make that font bigger, and I'm trying to kind of puzzle my way through it or translate it or whatever, I want the grammar showing first. And then I actually usually like the study Bible showing next because I get more concise explanation, and then the commentary. So that's kind of my workflow that I use most these days, is that I start with the text in Greek, and it doesn't have to be Greek, it could be Greek and English or whatever. And then I'll go grammar, study Bible, commentary. But that's just me. And that's just me right now. If I'm, you know, if I've changed my workflow for whatever reason, my categories might change. This is very simple to change. It's simply a matter of grabbing the category or clicking and holding on it and dragging and dropping it where you want it to go. So here is study Bibles. Let's say I want study Bibles showing above grammars. I'm going to click, hold, drag, and drop. But before I drop, you see that gray shadow line? That's how you know you've successfully clicked and held it. So now it can drop there. So if I want to put commentaries ahead of grammars, just anywhere in the word commentaries there, click, hold, drag, drop. My tool set, and we'll talk about that. Click, hold, drag, drop. Maybe you want to move that down, maybe you want to move it up. And you can do this until you've got the order that you want. And I think the default order, well, I don't remember. It's been so long since I've set up the info pane out of the box, but actually, can you restore to default? I'm not sure that you can. Anyway, whatever works the best for you is what you're going to want to do with dragging and dropping. Also note these triangles, they're very small. I'm almost certain they're isosceles triangles, but they're called disclosure triangles. They expand and collapse. And so just another way of organizing things is you can click those to hide what's showing. And that could be useful if you just wanted to see, all right, we haven't even done anything on Ephesians 2. Maybe I'm in Ephesians 2 and it's like, all right, let me settle in now. All right, so I'm going to start at verse 1. And I almost think of this as kind of like a checklist. Like it can be a little bit overwhelming, to see my library visually telling me, hey, Abram, you've got 50 things to check on this passage. Well, that's great, but I can only do one at a time. So what I often do is I close these triangles, and then this is when I'm really kind of digging in, and then I'll make my way through the content, which we'll talk about that in detail in just a bit, and then I will collapse that triangle, expand the next one. I might even show more resources, show less, and so on. So that's not exactly a power user feature, but it is kind of a practical one that I find useful. But the rearranging is very easy. Click and hold, then drag and drop to rearrange the categories. And I didn't mention the font adjuster here, but you can use that as well for your whole info pane. Let's talk about reading commentaries or other resources from the info pane, and some of this goes beyond the outline, but we'll do commentaries first. So let's say I'm here into verse 4. But God, being rich in mercy, because of His great love with which He loved us. Sentence isn't over yet, but here's my info for 2:4, and maybe I want to stop and study this rich in mercy. So I can access my commentaries to see what they've got. So here's how you do that. And again, multiple ways to interact with your commentaries. I've actually bullet pointed these. This applies to grammars, this applies to study Bibles, this applies to any image, any book that's showing here. The first one is you can just click to open it as a parallel pane with your Bible. So if I've got my info pane all set up, I've customized it however much I want to, I've gotten my categories in the right order, I've set my default Bible text, I'm in the right passage, now I'm going to read. One way is to click to open as a parallel pane. So if I click on this new Bible commentary, it opens it as a parallel pane. Now notice, and this is where your mileage varies because commentaries are different. This says 4 through 7. So in this new Bible commentary, it doesn't have an entry per se on verse 5 or verse 6 or verse 7. It has an entry on verses 4 through 7, but it shows up at verse 4 because Accordance tags it to that. But if I have opened this up now by clicking it, it will follow me in parallel. So will any other book image that I click on. And so let's take the SIL Exegetical Summary Series. I'm going to click and it's going to open. And in fact, it replaced that other one there. But back to the new Bible commentary, whichever one you have open in parallel, it will scroll along with you. So I'm in verse 5, verse 6, verse 7, it's not advancing, but now I'm at verse 8, it advances again. So you can make your way through the text that way. I personally, though, like to do this other option because I find it a little bit easier to kind of keep track of everything. You can command click, or that's on Mac, and or control click on Windows to open up this commentary in a new zone altogether. So I'm going to hold down command or control if you're on Windows and click, and there's the same content. Now it's open as a separate zone. And the zone is just defined by this darker now separating line so that I've still got what I had before, namely my Bible text, my info pane, and now I've got a zone and it's named commentaries. So I can actually keep going. I could do this now with the SIL Exegetical Summary Series. Hold down command, click, and it tabs it there. It starts to stack these tabs. NIV application commentary, see 3 tabs, 4 tabs, 5. And so often what I will do is I'll just go click, 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 click while holding down command, and I've got now 10 different tabs or however many I clicked. And this arrow here will show you the tab names because they don't all fit. You can also use this often overlooked but really helpful feature called magnify this zone, which when I click that, it pops that zone out. I mean, it literally magnifies it in the sense that my other stuff is still there. So my Bible text and info pane are there, they're just not showing. I can pop that back in and there they are. But this is how I more often than not interact with my commentaries. I might just read through them as different tabs and just click through. And then when I'm done, I might close them or I might keep them open for the next verse, because what will happen is they will follow me now. If I just go down by verse or scroll, all of them will follow me into whatever verses I go to. In fact, I could type in a totally different verse and a totally different book, and it would follow me as long as it had that book in that commentary. And so I would even suggest that the info pane, you can think of it as a launcher that then you don't necessarily need after you've launched it. And so I, at this point, could, if I wanted to, close my info pane. I've got my 10 commentaries open, and now I can, get to work. I can read them, I can study them, I can copy paste, I can highlight, I can do all that good stuff, knowing that if I'm just gonna do, say, verses 4 through 10 today, and if I want those 10 commentaries, I don't need to keep opening the info pane. I can just access that stuff there. It will tie the scrolling to the text, but put it in a different zone. And of course, the info pane, as you know, is just a click away if you want to get it back open for any reason. So that's what I like to do. That makes the tool more fully functioning. You can get more of them open. You can also access the table of contents that way and interact with the tool. But that's, again, it's just personal preference, but that's what I prefer to do. You can also, even simpler than that, you can hover over to read a snippet in the instant details. So I'm going to close this window. All that hard work I did of clicking 10 times, it's gone. But you can hover over a book, and we'll switch to study Bibles now for this. The same principle holds. I can hover over, so I'm in Ephesians 2:4. Just make sure I'm in Ephesians 2:4. All right, hover over it. And I'm going to hold down shift because I'm moving my cursor and I want to freeze the instant details. See here, it's 2:4 through 10. By God's mercy, God being rich in mercy, kindness and love, those who are joined to Jesus Christ are saved from the terrible consequences of their sin and enjoy the benefits of Christ's resurrection. I could see, what does the ESV Study Bible have to say? They have a note on but God. And that's a long note. In fact, it makes me wonder, am I getting the whole note from that verse? Well, I can make the instant details bigger. So there it is. But you can also, and this is the fourth thing on the handout, and then we'll pause because I want to interact with you all, and I see a question in the chat I want to respond to. You can also click and hold and get a popover. So you can hover and see it at a glance, but like here's a great example of one or here's Wesley Study Bible. They put 2, 1 through 10 all together, so that's not all fitting. But if I click and hold, what I get is a popover window that I can scroll through and then just click outside of it and it goes away. So not to overwhelm with options or choices, but it is, I think the programming philosophy, the goal is to give you options for how you would interact with the info pane. And as I say, my preferred option is this command click or control click to open it in a new zone and then do a bunch of tabs. I mean, you could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 study Bibles. See how it says study Bibles there? Now if I go to commentaries, now it changes to tools because it's mixed. It's study Bibles and commentaries. And now I've got 5 study Bibles and 5 commentaries, and I can just read it through and leave it. So lots of different options here. But I like that hovering option because when you get enough resources in your library, you may not know if you want to actually open it. You may just want to see at a glance, does this look like something that's relevant to what I'm studying or what I'm curious about? And I think a great example is that "but God knows." Well, yeah, that's like super relevant. It's the first 2 verses, and presumably it's going to tell me about that conjunction and the work that it's doing there. And so that, I would hover over that and see that and maybe be excited by that and then click it open. Some of these commentaries, though, will have very long entries, and so you'll have to do that click hold if you just want to kind of do a quick browse. But again, you can also click them open in full into a different zone. All right, let me take that question that has been there, and thanks for your patience. Do the items shown in the info pane follow the order in your library? And yes, they do. Thank you for asking that. Actually, that perfectly anticipates what is next. So yes, the short answer is yes, and I'll give you a longer answer in just a moment because that is our next step. Because I want to actually not just answer that in the affirmative, but also kind of show that and see how that might be, why that would be beneficial to actually spend some time thinking about that. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. Somebody asks, can you float the info pane window to put on a separate monitor? Good question. I'm gonna have to crowdsource that one. But I don't think you can. I mean, you could make it, you could put it in a separate workspace, but if you're talking about this floating window right here, well, actually, you know what? I don't know why you couldn't. So I can pop that out. And someone who's got, I don't have an external monitor, someone who's got one maybe can confirm, but the way that you would do this would, you would click and hold. So there's that little pop-up, but now you're gonna put that in, what would you do? Just drag it to your external monitor. So that should work. And then what will happen, so pretend this is your external monitor, but that's just popping out your instant details. So yeah, I think it's not the whole info pane per se, but what would happen then is you would have this be a little bit neater. You could still open these, but the hovering would this would be happening on another screen. So I don't know if I've done justice to your question. So feel free to ask a follow-up, but that's a great idea though. Yeah, to keep the instant details over there. Okay, here's a question. Let me respond to this. Somebody asks, command click on a Mac opens a new tab in the same zone for me. What option was changed or what's the difference? My zone says mixed with a couple of tabs open already. The only thing I can think of is, so we've got pane, tab, zone, workspace. That's the whole thing. So I've only got one zone showing. Now I've got 2 zones showing, and that's this. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, new tab in the same zone, which would be as expected. Oh, in the same zone, so that would not be expected. I don't know what's going on there because the way that this opens in the same zone is by not holding down command. So if you are holding down command and it's opening in the same zone, I'm honestly not sure where. This is how I've always used it. So I'd have to get back to you because I'm just not sure where that, I'm not sure what the setting for that would be. Yeah, let me come back to that if you don't mind. Thanks for asking. In fact, I'll go ahead and let me just put this email just so I don't bottleneck your request. If you email support@accordancebible.com, they could help. That it sounds like there may be some troubleshooting involved there. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would fix that. But it will also be the case that here, let's try this. Let's do it this way. Let's say I've already got something open here, and let's say it's, you know, open separately. If I open up, yeah, it's going into that same zone. If this is what you're describing, I think that's as expected. In other words, if you already had something open up in its own zone, the info pane goes into that zone rather than a new one. That I'm not sure how you would change, except for I would say, here, let's do this. Let's say you're reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who will not show up. Well, actually, you can get him to show up in the info pane. Not him, but his books. We're not that advanced yet. So let's say you've got this and you're reading it devotionally, and this is not a verse by verse title. And so you now command click. There's your mixed tools. What you would do in this case is I would just take your new info pane thing and click and hold and drag it into its new zone and keep whatever you had in your other zone there, and then open up there and it will stack on that zone. I hope that's at least somewhat close to answering your question. But if not, I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards. So I'll give you, you could email me, and I'll put my email in the chat, or you can email support@accordancebible.com. They'll actually be quicker and probably more efficient than me on helping you troubleshoot that. But yeah, thanks for asking. Sorry I can't get you further along on that. Any other questions or comments? We're just talking about reading commentaries or study Bibles or whatever from the info pane. I do want to move next to organizing in the library. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I see. Yeah, thanks for that comment. Because it appears because the workspace is mixed. Okay. All right, so let's talk about this feature where the info pane is following what's in your library. So again, we talked about organizing the categories here, and I've got grammars down at the bottom, study Bibles, commentaries. This is the order of my library with, back to the definition, with the kind of major, not major, but with the constriction of it has to have that verse treated in it. So what that means is that obviously, maybe this goes without saying, but like my Genesis commentaries are not going to show here because it's info pane for a specific verse. Really the idea is to save you a lot of time and not even have to think about like, well, does this New Testament series I have, which has 18 volumes and it's not complete, did they do an Ephesians volume or not? You know, you don't even have to stop and look that up. It's going to show in the info pane. But the reason I mentioned Genesis in Ephesians is because your library only has one order and it's going to follow that order, but the way that it will do it is basically, here we should go to study Bibles because that'll be easier. The way that it will do it is it will basically run a search, Ephesians 2:4 NLT Study Bible results, Ephesians 2:4 ESV Study Bible results. I mean, it's basically going through these one by one, running a search, and if it has results, it's showing it. So it's following the order with that kind of major caveat that, like the Jewish Study Bible, for example, you'll see here is between the NIV Student and Life Application, and it's not here. Well, that's because the Jewish Study Bible does not have Ephesians 2:4, let alone Ephesians, let alone the New Testament in it. So it's working exactly as it should. If you get into commentaries where, and this gets a little bit more complicated in your library, You may have some single volume commentaries. You may have some Gospels commentaries. You may have some Old Testament only commentaries, so on and so forth. Put them in the order, I mean, you can put them in whatever prioritized order you want to, realizing that it's just going to skip the ones that aren't relevant. So for example, I've got showing here, and you can just ignore these folders for now. I've got showing NIGTC Mark, RT France. That is because I love that commentary. I use it regularly in our Mark translation notes webinars. As many of you know, I was assigned mercifully to read it cover to cover in a seminary class, and I loved it. Anyway, I could go on and on, but so that's first in my info pane. So it's not going to show in Ephesians. So all I need to do is just think about, well, what do I most want to show for Ephesians? And you know, the New Bible Commentary is kind of my answer to like, well, I like to see that first for any passage. But then you can get more specific and more subdivided there. But if I go to Mark 1:1, in my commentaries, here's New Bible Commentary, here's RT France, he's right there up at the top. I could even put him up here and rerun that search, and that's going to show first because that's first in my library. But I don't need to worry in the organizing of my library, like, oh, well, why would I put a single book first? Well, with the info pane, it doesn't matter, because when you're in Genesis or Exodus or Psalms, it's going to skip it. Whereas when I'm in the Psalms, I want to see Waltke, because that's also an excellent commentary. Haven't read it cover to cover, but it's great. So I do that. Now you can, and we've got a webinar on this. In fact, I may be due to teach one soon, but you can organize this library kind of extensively, including with these folders. But the kind of short version of this is that, yes, it follows that order, and it's worth spending some time, I think, just for no other reason than, you know, not having to navigate through a lot of book cover images in accordance, which maybe that's fine too. You know, you can always just show more, show less. That's not a big deal. But I, for a while, was using the info pane where, you know, maybe I had just gotten a commentary that I really liked, and I'd have to click show more like 5 or 6 times to see it, because by default, that's going to show up last. And so in that case, especially if you just get a commentary or a study Bible or a grammar, it's worth taking the time to just click and drag it up to the top of that category in the library. Again, remembering that Accordance will do all the rest of the work for you. It doesn't matter if that commentary doesn't cover everything, because if it doesn't cover the book you're in, it won't show up. It will just go on to the next one in the list. Comments or questions on the order of the commentaries in the info pane? And again, it's a personal decision. I personally, just as a strategy, I like having a 1-volume commentary that I know covers every book and every verse. It may do it at a passage level. So like I may get a Genesis 1:1, but not a Genesis 1:2 per se. It may be part of a paragraph, but I like that. So for me, my first hit is always going to be something from this particular commentary. But you can see here, I've got a totally different set of books showing for Genesis than I did for Ephesians 2. And that's as it should be, super time saving. Because after getting enough commentaries, I can't, it's hard for me to keep track, you know, of what series are complete or partial or New Testament only or Old Testament only or whatever. You don't have to do that. And obviously this is going to change with you over time as your library grows. Your info pane will show more stuff. Keep questions and comments coming. I'm happy to take them. We'll talk just a little bit more about cross references in the info pane. And we didn't go through all of the categories, but grammars and cross references, well, let's just do cross references. Cross references is an interesting tool, and this is kind of like approximating what you might have in a print Bible. It depends on the Bible, of course, but you know, with the exception of the most stripped down Pew Bible or Pocket Bible, most Bibles, even the non-study Bibles, will have cross references somewhere in the margins. and you can get your info pane to show those too. This is one of the options that you can set specifically in that gear icon. And when you go to the gear icon, you can select your cross-reference tool, and it will just show what you have in your library. So you may have more than this, you may have fewer than this. If you want to take some time to look at your cross-references as their own modules, that's probably worthwhile. So even apart from the info pane, you might even just type in cross-ref to your library and see, all right, I've got these NLT Study Bible cross-references. Let me just click that open and see what that's like. So I'm in Mark 10, and it's got a few per verse or passage, and that looks pretty good. Obviously, there are many passages that don't have cross-references at all, but I might see that and think, that looks robust enough for me. And then go to my gear icon, set text pane display. Nope, sorry, let me make sure I have my info pane. Like I said, lots of customizations. This is what I want. Set info pane options, cross-reference tool, NLT Study Bible cross-references. Now let's see what we've got for Ephesians 2:4, and just the one, John 3:16. And you might even want to scroll this up to the top. So anything you've got now in that tool is going to show. And notice here, 2:10, I've got nothing. Well, that just means the New Living Translation Study Bible cross-references tool doesn't have any cross-reference listed for Ephesians 2:10, but it does for 2:9. It is not from works so that no one can boast. And here's where that hypertext setting comes in. Romans 3:28, Titus 2:5. I could click these open or just hover over them to see. And again, you might want to resize this, but that's a useful tool, or a useful aspect of the info pane, I should say, is the cross-references tool. And that is one, it's a little different from the others in the sense that you can select your tool. The limitation to that is there is not a way to have multiple cross-reference tools open at once, unless there's some brilliant workaround that I'm missing. I suppose you could open up multiple info panes and change the settings on each one, but that just sounds cumbersome to me. So unfortunately, as far as I can see, that is just the one cross-reference tool that you get to select. However, you can, oh yeah, here, let me just show you one other thing and then back to questions. Where you get to have a lot of cross-references, and this comprehensive cross-references tool, by the way, this one has a lot. So I'll go to this and show you this next thing. This will be the last thing I share, and then rest of the time is for you for questions. Complete cross-reference index for everything. So if you were to go, for example, type in Ephesians 2:4 here, you see you've got a lot here. Now, if I make that my default in the info pane, let's see what that looks like. Comprehensive cross-references. Click OK, Ephesians 2:4, scroll. So that's going to show cross-references for just the Bible, actually, so it won't have all of those, but trying to get to one where I have, here's multiple. All right, this is a good example. 1:17, I pray that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, will give you spiritual wisdom and revelation in your growing knowledge of him. Here's one cross-reference, here's another, here's another. I've noted here that you can hover over to see it in instant details. You can click it to see it in a new tab, or in a case where you have multiple cross-references, if you hold down Command on Mac or Control on Windows, hold that down and click any one of the references, it gives you all of the references. So I didn't have to do this one by one. I can see now all of these cross-references right next to that verse. So anytime I've got multiple cross-references, I can hold down Command, click, and it gives it to me here in a separate zone. So that's kind of fun. That was also just one of those things that I used Accordance for a few months before I realized that, but kind of a neat trick. I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more we did not cover on the info pane. And so I would rather surface that from you than do more from me. Like, we didn't talk about my tool set or topics. And so if you have questions about those, let me know. But I'd love to hear from you, any comments or questions you have. Let me just say too, that if you follow this link to the help files, you're going to get just pretty extensive documentation on the info pane. So I commend that to you. It unpacks each of these categories. It talks about all of them. And so that goes in a great deal of depth. So you can get that from your own help files here in Accordance, but I also hyperlink to it in the handout. All right, let's see what questions folks have. And if you want to ask a question out loud too, you can raise your hand, your virtual hand, and I'll unmute you and you can ask. Oh, here's a great question. What are the top 5 cross-reference modules you would recommend and why? Wow. Well, let me give you a short answer and just say that I think generally speaking, what I'm looking for in a cross-reference module is thoroughness. There is, of course, some degree of interpretation, like, is this quoting this verse? Is this alluding to this verse? Is it not? So, you know, you can disagree with the interpretation, but generally what I'm looking for is something that has a lot of cross-references. I want it to be thorough. So if it's even kind of a passing echo of a verse, I want to see it in the cross references and decide for myself. That's just my own personal preference. So with that approach, I would say the New Living Study Bible is along those lines. That's one that I would recommend. I don't know if I can get all the way up to 5, but I also really appreciate the NA28 cross references. And those come with the Greek text and the UBS 5. Those are good as well. Those are pretty thorough too. In fact, I think those probably will tilt more in the direction of, if it's even like a 3-word possible echo, it will show it up for you. So I would say, yeah, NLT Study Bible cross references and either of these Greek ones. I also like this comprehensive cross references one. But that's a great question. Oh yeah, okay. Here's a great. Yeah, let me put this in the chat. And any other questions or comments, keep them coming. We've got a couple more minutes. Somebody points out that you can add more cross references in my tool set. And so my tool set, in short, and you'll if you want to see more on this, that help URL I linked you to will show you more. But this basically allows you to put anything you want here, even if it's not verse specific. So I've got a dictionary here. And so what this will do is it will search my dictionary for Ephesians 1:1. So it's kind of a way to bring in those tools. But you can also go to cross references and add another one here, update. And so now, in fact, you might even just drag, here, let's get to one, drag my tool set right up next to cross references. And so here you've got the cross references from your default tool, and now you've got more here in my tool set. So it's not quite the same as having like a list all in cross references, which would be a great feature request. But yes, it is showing the tool set. So thank you for that. That's a great workaround. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll end with just a little bit of housekeeping, and obviously you're free to go at any time. But let me end the recording and I'll stay on for another couple minutes with you all who are here live. If you are on the recording, just a reminder that you can get this handout by emailing me here.